I have dressed the Duke of Marrowdale every morning for 31 years, and in all that time I never once saw him look surprised, until the morning he came down to a house that had, overnight, forgotten how to hold him. But I am an old man, and old men are permitted to begin a thing where it truly begins, and this does not begin with the Duke at all. It begins with a woman so small and so quiet that the great house had trained itself, over years, never to see her. Her name was Nell Fenwick, and I will confess to you, to my shame, that for a long time I could not have told you her name either. Let me set the house before you first, for you must understand the cold before you can feel the thaw. Marrowdale in those days ran like a clock wound by a stern hand that dared not stop. His Grace, Alaric, 7th Duke of Marrowdale, whom the whole county called the Iron Duke and never once to his face, ordered his world the way other men order a regiment. Breakfast at 8, not 5 minutes past. The accounts laid before him on the 3rd day of the month. The east front curtains drawn at dusk, the west at 9, and God help the footman who left a chair a hand's breadth off its mark. For his Grace saw such things the way a hawk sees a mouse in a far field, and said nothing, and remembered. I do not tell you this to make him a monster. He was not a monster. I knew him from a boy. I knew him when he laughed before. He had buried a father who despised him and a mother who did not, in that order and too close together, and somewhere in the second grief he had made a decision, the way the young make decisions that harden into the shape of a whole life, that if he could keep his house exact enough, ordered enough, iron enough, then nothing more could ever be taken from him unawares. That is all iron is, in the end. It is what fear becomes when a proud man will not let himself weep. And through all that clockwork, unremarked moved Nell. You would not have marked her. I mean that plainly. She came up to my shoulder, and I am not a tall man. She had a plain, wide, patient face and brown hair she pinned without a thought for vanity, and she wore gray, always gray, the gray of a room no one has bothered to light. She had come to Marrowdale years before as reader and companion to the old dowager, his Grace's mother, and it is with the dowager that I must pause, for it was the dowager who first showed all of us, had we the wit to see, what Nell Fenwick was. The old Duchess was dying slowly, that last long winter of her life, of a wasting that took her strength before it took her wit, so that she lay bright-eyed and helpless in a body that would no longer answer her. His Grace could not bear the sick-room. I do not say that against him. Grief takes men differently, and the sight of the one person who had loved him without condition slipping away by inches was a thing his iron could not face, and so he stayed away and called it letting her rest. But Nell did not stay away. Nell was there every hour that mattered. She read to the old lady when the old lady could still follow, and when she could no longer follow, the words Nell read on anyway, because she had understood, and this is the whole of Nell, this one thing. She had understood that it was not the story the dying woman wanted but the voice, the warm human sound of not being left alone in the dark. She learned the exact heat the old lady liked her broth. She learned which pillow, which window, which hour of the failing afternoon brought the most ease. And on the last night, when even I could see the end was an hour off, it was not the physician and not the son who sat holding the old Duchess's hand as she went. It was the small gray companion nobody paid much mind to, saying her name softly, over and over, so that the last thing my old mistress heard in this world was a kind voice that knew her. The dowager left Nell a little money and folded into the will in her own failing hand, a line I saw with my own eyes, and to my dear Fenwick, who saw me when I had become invisible even to those who loved me, my thanks passed the power of any bequest. His Grace read that line. I watched him read it, and I would give a great deal to go back and shake the young fool by the collar and say, "Do you not hear her? Do you not hear your own mother telling you what this woman is?" But he read it as a man reads a stranger's letter, and set it down, and I do not think it stayed in him above a day. When the dowager was buried, no one thought to send Nell away, and no one thought to keep her, and so she simply stayed, the way a keystone stays in an arch long after the men who raised it have forgotten it is bearing the weight of everything above. And here is the thing the house did not know it knew. When a tenant's roof went in the March gales, it was Nell who heard of it first from the laundry maid, whose sister lived out that way, and Nell who quietly moved a line in the ledger so the timber was bought and the roof mended before ever his grace was troubled with the matter. When the Duke's chocolate came up each morning, at exactly the heat he liked and never once remarked upon, that was Nell, who had the trick from the dowager and gave it to the kitchen in a word. When the vast, cold, shut-up rooms that had been his mother's were kept aired and dusted, and the little clock on her writing desk kept faithfully wound, though his grace never went in and would have said, had you asked him, that he did not care what became of them. That was Nell on the first of every month, alone, with a duster, and a key she had never been given but somehow always had. She remembered the tenant's children by name. She knew which of the maids was afraid of the dark, and gave her the room by the stair without ever saying why. She knew that old Beck, that is me, took his tea weak now, because my heart is not what it was, and the greater kindness was that she never let a soul know she had noticed my heart at all. She was the memory of that house. She was the small, warm, living thing at the center of it that kept the great cold body alive. And the house stepped over her 100 times a day, and never felt the stair beneath its foot. His grace stepped over her most of all. I have thought long about whether he was cruel to her, and I have decided the truth is worse than cruelty. Cruelty would at least have been a kind of attention. He simply did not register her, the way you do not register the step you have climbed 10,000 times until the night it is not there and you fall. Once, in the long gallery, he stopped, frowning, and said to the air, "There is a woman who winds my mother's clock." Not to her, to the empty air. And Nell, who stood 3 feet from his elbow with that very key in her hand, said nothing, and dropped a small curtsy he did not see and went on about her business. I watched her face as she passed me. There was no bitterness in it. That was the thing that undid me later when I finally understood it. There was never any bitterness. She had decided, somewhere long ago, that to be useful and unthanked was still a great deal better than to be idle and admired, and she had made her peace with a world that would not trouble to learn her name. I have wondered since whether that peace was not its own quiet pride. I have wondered whether underneath it she was waiting, without letting even herself know she waited, for one single soul in all the world to look at her and see a woman and not a duster. I cannot ask her that now. She would only smile. But I did not have the wit to ask her then, and I have had to carry the not asking a long while. Now, let me bring on the winter, for it is time. It came down hard and early, the winter I mean. By the middle of November the road to the village was a gray frozen rut, and the great chimneys of Marrowdale smoked day and night, and still a cold got into the corridors that got into the teeth. It was the kind of winter that makes a proud man prouder, for he mistakes the warmth of his own fires for a thing he has made himself. And it was into that cold that his Grace's cousin came to stay. Mr. Crail was the sort of relation a great house collects the way a wool coat collects burrs walking through gorse, a smiling, idle, sharp-eyed man who had run through his own fortune, and had come now to run a while, comfortably, through his cousin's. He had a trick I have seen before in his sort, the trick of making everyone in a room feel faintly in the way except himself. He praised the wine, and insulted the vintage in the same breath so cleverly you did not catch the insult till he was 3 rooms off. He was charming to his Grace and careless with the servants, and within a single day he had taken a particular dislike to Nell. Not a hot dislike. Mr. Crail had not the depth for a hot feeling. It was the cold, amused kind, the dislike a small soul takes to a smaller one who happens, without ever meaning to be, better than himself. He would watch her cross a room with that little private smile, and I knew the smile, and I did not like it, and I could do nothing about it, for I was a valet and he was a guest in blood. "Who is the little gray person?" I heard him ask his Grace at dinner on the second night, and there was a laugh folded into it. "She's forever creeping about the place. Is she a governess without any children, or a housekeeper without any keys?" I was at the door, where a good servant stands, and Nell was at the sideboard where she always was, seeing quietly that the second course did not shame the house. For the butler had the gout, and she had been doing his thinking for him. This year passed without a soul remarking it. His Grace looked up from his plate with that faint iron frown, and he said, and I did not know, could not have known, that these were the words that would break his own life open. She was some companion of my mother's, I believe. She stays on. I hardly know why. I hardly know why. She was 6 feet from him when he said it. I saw her hands go still on the decanter, just for the space of one breath. Then they moved again, steady, and she poured the wine without a tremor, and her plain, wide face gave up nothing at all. But I had dressed that man 31 years, and watched that woman more of them than I had troubled to count. And I knew, the way you know a hard frost is coming though the sky is clear and blue, that something in the house had just cracked in a place that would not mend by morning. Mr. Crail laughed and said something light about charity and old furniture, and his Grace did not laugh. I will grant him that, but neither did he stop him, and men forget that not stopping a thing is also a choice, and often the colder one. And Nell finished pouring and set the decanter down without a sound and went out of the room, and the great clock of the house ticked on, and no one but an old valet at the door marked that anything at all had happened. She came to me the next evening. I want to be honest that she did not come weeping nor to complain, for she was a woman who did neither. She came to the little room off the pantry where I mend his Grace's linen, and she stood in the doorway in her gray, and she said, quite simply, "Mr. Beck, I think I shall be leaving Marrowdale." I put down the shirt I was at. I said, and I am ashamed now how little I found to say, leaving, whatever for. She smiled at me, that patient wide smile. Because a house should not keep a person it hardly knows why it keeps. His Grace was quite right, you know. It isn't good for either of us for the house to hold what it doesn't value, or for me to be held so. I have a little put by from the old mistress. My mother's people were near Harrogate. I shall do very well. You cannot, I said. Nell, and it was, I realized even as I said it, the first time in all those years I had spoken her name to her face, and I saw it land, that small, startled warmth in her eyes, that a person had used her name. Nell, you cannot go. This house would come down about our ears. This house, she said gently, the way you tell a child a hard, true thing you would rather not, has never once noticed I was holding it up. It will get along splendidly. It always tells itself it does everything quite alone. No bitterness even then, only a kind of tired music under the words. And she wished me a good night, and went up the back stair to her small room by the maids, and I sat with the mending cold in my lap and did not set another stitch that night. I should have gone up to his Grace. I have told myself so 1,000 times since, that I should have gone to him at his brandy and said, "Your Grace, the smallest person under your roof is the largest thing in it, and she is leaving tonight because you told your table you hardly knew why she stayed." But I was a servant of 31 years, and a servant of 31 years does not tell a duke his own heart. So I held my tongue, and I went to my bed, and above me in the dark a small woman in gray folded 3 gray gowns, a Bible, and a locket into a trunk a child could have carried. She left before light, so as to make no trouble. That was so wholly like her that I could weep telling it even now, that she should steal away at an hour to inconvenience no one. On the very morning she would inconvenience the whole house forever after. She left a note for the housekeeper about the month's accounts, a note for the kitchen about the trick of his Grace's chocolate, a note for the head gardener about the dowager's white roses, which wanted covering before the hard frost was on them. She thought of every last thing and every last soul, and no one at all of herself. She left the key to his mother's rooms on my own washstand, wrapped in a scrap of paper, and on the paper in her small even hand was written only this: "Mr. Beck, please wind it Fridays. The little clock runs slow if you leave it to the month's end. Thank you for saying my name." And I have that scrap of paper yet. I will have it, I think, till they bury me. And so the morning came, the morning I began this whole long telling with, when the Iron Duke of Marrowdale came down his own great staircase into a house that had, overnight, forgotten how to hold him, and did not yet know why. The frost that woke in the Duke that first morning did not thaw. It spread, the way cold spreads through a house when a door has been left standing open somewhere out of sight, and no one can find which door, only that the warmth is going out of everything. I watched it happen over the next fortnight. I have never forgotten a day of it, because it was the slow undoing of the proudest man I ever served, worked not by any great blow but by 100 small absences, none of them large enough on its own to name, and that, I have come to think, is how the truly large losses always take a man, not with one thunderclap, with 1,000 small silences where a warmth used to be. It began with an egg. His Grace came down at 8 as he came down every morning of his life, and the breakfast was laid and he sat, and he cut into his egg and it was wrong. Not badly wrong. A shade too hard, no more. But I saw him pause with the knife and frown, and I felt the first cold breath of the thing that was coming. For here is what neither he nor the cook knew, that each morning before the tray went up, Nell had a way of catching the cook's eye and touching her own ear, their private signal, built up quietly over years, that meant soft this morning, he slept ill. And his Grace had slept ill. I had heard him wakeful through the wall. But the woman who watched him closely enough to know he had slept ill, and to spare him a hard egg on a hard morning, was 2 days gone down the Harrogate road, and there was no one left in all that great house who marked the Duke of Marrowdale closely enough to know how he had slept. He frowned at the egg and said nothing, and set his fork down, and I poured his coffee and said nothing either, and the cold breath passed over both of us. The chocolate did not come up at all. There was a small confusion below stairs. The note about the trick of it had been mislaid, or read and not understood, and no one now living in that kitchen knew the precise heat his Grace liked, for the one who knew had written it down and gone. So the chocolate did not come, and when he asked for it, lo, it came up at last lukewarm and thin, and he drank a mouthful and set it aside, and I do not think he could have told you why so small a thing sat so heavy on him. Only that some daily warmth he had leaned on without ever knowing he leaned was simply, now not there. Then it was the ledger, for it was the 3rd of the month. The book came up in the housekeeper's hand, a good woman, but not the other, neater hand his Grace had never once troubled to notice, and there were figures in it now that did not sit right, not through any dishonesty, through the plain want of the quiet hand that had smoothed them for years. For here is a thing I learned only that winter. Every month, before the ledger ever reached the Duke, Nell had gone through it and quietly balanced away the small mercies, the timber for a poor man's roof, the physician's fee for a widow, the extra flour sent to a family in a bad month, folding them into the household, some so gently that his Grace saw only a house well and evenly run, and never the dozens of small kindnesses running under it like a warm stream under ice. Now the ice was gone, and the stream showed. "What is this?" said his Grace, tapping the page. "There is money gone out here for timber in October that I never authorized." "That would be Croft's roof, your Grace," said the housekeeper, who knew that much. "It went in the March gales." "In March," he said slowly, "and paid in October, and I was never told." "No, your Grace, it was always just seen to." It was always just seen to. I watched him sit with those 5 words. I watched them work in him. And I saw a thing move behind that iron face that I had not seen move there since his mother's coffin went down. A small, cold dawning that the world he had believed he ruled alone, single-handed, by the sheer force of his own order, had in truth been held together all this while by a hand that was not his, and that he could not now have described the owner of. He did not understand it yet, but the frost was in him now and working, and it did not stop. I will tell you of the roses, for the roses were the turn. It came the 3rd week of November, a hard, black, killing frost, the kind that comes down in the night and takes the marrow out of any living thing not covered against it. And the dowager's white roses had not been covered. The note Nell left the head gardener had gone astray, or been thought a small matter beside the great matter of the house running rough, And so the old white roses that his Grace's mother had planted with her own hands, that Nell had nursed through a dozen winters without one soul asking her to, stood out all that black night unprotected. And in the morning every cane of them was killed, blackened, split, dead to the root. His Grace walked out that gray afternoon to the walled garden. He did not often walk out, but he went, without a coat, to the corner where his mother had liked to sit among those roses in her last good summers, and he found them dead, every one. And he stood a long while in the cold with no coat, looking at the black dead canes, and when at last he came in his face was the face of a man who has just understood that a thing is gone which cannot be got back, and does not yet know it is only the first of many such understandings that winter had in store for him. Who tended my mother's roses? He asked me that night, very low, as I took his coat, for he was chilled through, and would not say so. Miss Fenwick did, your Grace, I said. For years. Nobody asked her to, she just did. He was quiet a moment. Then, Fenwick, as though testing the shape of it, as though it were a word in a tongue he had once known and let go of. The gray woman. Nell Fenwick, your Grace, I said, and I could not help what came next. 31 years buys an old man a little license at the last. The woman your Grace hardly knew why you kept. He looked at me sharply, and I braced for the cold word. But it did not come. He only stood there and took it, the way a man takes a chill he knows he has earned by his own folly in going out without a coat. And that, the Duke of Marrowdale letting his valet say a hard, true thing to his face and only bearing it, that was the first true sign that the iron had cracked all the way down. Now let me show you the thing entire, for I have told you that she held the house up, and it is another matter to see it, and his Grace had to see it that winter, one loss at a time. The tenants came. They had always come, but they had come before to her, quietly at the kitchen door or on the road, and been heard and gone away eased, before ever grievance climbed as high as the Duke. Now they came and found no Nell and knew not who else to go to, and so at last they came to the front of the house, hats in hand, frightened, to the Iron Duke himself, and he had no notion what to do with them, for he had never in his life known they existed to be dealt with. He had believed his tenants content. He learned that black December that they had never been merely content. They had been cared for, hand over hand, by a woman he could not have picked out of a market crowd. I stood by when the widow Ames came. Her man had died 2 winters back, and there had been, ever since, a small sum found for her each quarter, found, of course, by Nell, folded so quietly into the accounts that his Grace had never seen it. This quarter it had not come, and the poor soul had walked 3 frozen miles to ask, trembling, whether she had given some offense. And his Grace stood in his own hall and looked at this shaking old woman and had not the first idea what she meant, what sum, found how, by whom, and I watched him grope through the dark of his own ignorance and come up against the same wall he was coming up against a dozen times a day now. Fenwick did this. Fenwick did all of this, and I never knew. He sent the widow away eased. He was not a bad man, only a blind one, and once a thing was set plainly before him, he did the right of it. But I saw, when she had gone, that it had cost him something to be shown so nakedly how much good had been done under his roof, in his name, by a hand he had let go without a word. Mr. Crail, through all of this, grew less comfortable by the day. A house that has begun to grieve its own lost heart has no more warmth to spare for a man who laughs at gray women, and his Grace, though he said nothing direct, grew shorter with his cousin as the fortnight wore on, until one gray morning Mr. Crail discovered pressing business elsewhere and was gone in his hired chaise before noon, and I do not think a single soul at Marrowdale was sorry, and I know his Grace was not, for I saw his face at the window as the chaise went down the drive. And it was the face of a man, watching the last of his own foolishness drive away. But the thing that broke him, that broke the iron open all the way, was the cold in his mother's rooms. It was a Friday. I had gone up, as her note bade me, please wind it Fridays with the key wrapped in her scrap of paper, to the dowager's shut rooms, to wind the little clock, and I found his grace already there. He had not set foot in those rooms in 3 years. I knew it for a fact. He could not bear them, the loss was too near the bone, and he had kept away and called it letting them be. But there he stood in the doorway in his coat in the cold, for the fires were not lit, had not been lit, because the woman who had seen those rooms aired and warmed on the first of every month was gone, and he was looking at the fine gray dust that had begun, in only a fortnight, to settle over his mother's things. The dust that, in all the years of Nell's quiet keeping, had never once been let to settle at all. "It was warm in here," he said without turning. He knew my step by now. "Whenever I passed the door I never came in, you know that I could not, but the air that came out of it was always warm. And I thought," his voice did a thing I had not heard it do, "I thought the house did that. I thought it was just the house being a great warm house. I never once wondered who lit the fires in a room I would not enter." "No, your grace," I said. "It was Miss Fenwick, on the first of every month, and Fridays for the clock, alone." He turned then, and I will tell you plainly that in 31 years I never saw that man's face as it was in that moment, and I hope to God I never see such a look on any man again, for it was the face of one to whom the whole shape of his life has just been shown from a new side, and it is not the shape he thought he had built. He had believed himself a self-made fortress, warmed by his own order, needing no one. He was learning, in his dead mother's cold and dusty room, that every warm thing inside his fortress had been carried in through a side door, day after day, for years, by a small gray woman whose name he had not troubled to keep, and that he had let an idle fool laugh her out of his house and had not lifted one finger, because he had not known she was worth the finger. "Where has she gone?" he said, and there was no iron in it now, none. "Beck, where has she gone?" "Her people were near Harrogate, your grace," I said. "She left a fortnight since, before light, so as to make no trouble." So as to make no trouble. I watched it go into him and strike bone, that even in the leaving she had thought first of everyone but herself, had crept out at a black hour rather than inconvenience the house that had never once thanked her. And I watched the last of the iron go out of him, not broken loud, the way iron breaks in a ballad. It went the way a hard frost goes when the true thaw finally comes, all at once, and everywhere, and afterward you cannot name the moment it turned. He crossed the room and put his hand on the writing desk, the cold desk, where the little clock stood stopped, for I am an old man and had missed a Friday, God forgive me. And he stood a moment with his fingers on the stopped clock, and then he said, lo, the thing I had waited a fortnight, and though I never knew it, years, to hear the Iron Duke of Marrowdale say aloud. "I have been a fool in my own house. The wisest and the kindest heart under this roof walked out under my nose. And I did not so much as raise my eyes. I said, at my own table with her standing not 6 feet from me, that I hardly knew why she stayed." He turned to me. "Beck, have the gray mare saddled, and find me the road to Harrogate." "Your grace," I said, "it is near dark, and the roads this week the frost has made them murder." "I know what the roads are." He was already moving, already reaching for the heavy coat he had not worn to the dead roses. "I have wasted years not seeing her, Beck, years. I will not now waste a single further night." He stopped in the doorway, one hand on the frame of the room he could not enter 3 years running, and he said, half to me and half to the cold dusty air where his mother's warmth used to be, "If she will not have me, and she has every right on earth not to have me, then I will at least stand before her once and say her name and tell her I know now what she was. A man owes that much even to a heart he threw away, especially to a heart he threw away." And he went. I want to tell it true, for the truth is finer than any polish I could put on it. He did not ride out like a hero in a song, cloak streaming, sure of his welcome. He rode out like a frightened man who has understood, too late, exactly what he stands to lose, out into a black December evening with a hard frost already setting white on the stones, and the road to Harrogate no better than a frozen rut a horse could break a leg in. I stood at the great door and watched the one lantern of him go swinging down the drive and out into the dark, smaller and smaller, until the night took it, and I confess an old man's tears got the better of me there on the step, for I had watched this small gray woman hold up this whole cold house for years and be stepped over for her pains. And now at last, the greatest and hardest man in the county was riding out through the killing dark to find her, and to say her name, and to mean it. He was gone 2 days, and what those 2 days cost him, and what he found at the end of them, is the last of my telling, and I will not hurry it, for it is the only wedding an old man has left to give you. The first night he did not reach Harrogate at all. 8 miles out, on the worst of the frozen road, the gray mare cast a shoe on the iron ruts, and his Grace, who had never in his life walked a horse a mile when he might ride her, got down and led her the last of it on foot through the dark, for he would sooner lame himself than lame her, and there was besides no soul on that road to send for help. He came at last, well past midnight, to a wretched coaching inn at a crossroads, a mean place he would not in his old life have let his valet stop at, and he stabled the mare himself and sat up the rest of the night in the cold tap-room, because he could not sleep for the thought of her. He told me of that night after more than once, how he sat by the banked fire and asked every carter and drover who came stamping in out of the cold whether they knew of a Miss Fenwick, a small woman, gray gowns, a quiet way, lately come toward Harrogate, and not one of them did, not one. And he said it was there, in that mean tap-room in the small hours, asking strangers after her and being met each time with a shrug and a blank face, that the whole cruelty of her life came home to him entire, for here was the very thing that had shaped her. That she was the sort the world does not mark, the sort that passes and is not remembered, and now, when at last there was a man who wanted with his whole broken heart to find her and mark her forever, he could not, for love or money, turn up a single soul who had so much as noticed her go by. He had helped make her invisible in his years of stepping over her, and now her invisibility had turned and shut the door in his face. There is a justice in that, cold and exact, and I think he felt it sitting there, and I think it did him good, the way a hard cold does a fevered man good. The second day he had the mare shod at a smithy at first light and rode on, and reached the district where the dowager had told him, years past, that Fenwick's people lived, and it was wrong. They had moved from there long since. The cottage was another family's now. No one in it had heard the name. And his Grace stood in the frozen lane of a strange poor parish with the short afternoon already failing around him. And he told me this himself, with a wonder that never left him. He came very near to despair. He had ridden 2 days into the cold on the strength of a name and a memory, and the memory was wrong, and the name meant nothing to anyone, and the light was going. And for the first time in his ordered life, the Iron Duke of Marrowdale did not know what to do. And so he did the thing he had never once done. He asked. Not commanded, asked. He went into the small gray village church, because he could think of nowhere else on God's earth to turn, and he found an old woman sweeping the stone aisle in the last light, and he took off his hat to her, this great grim mud-spattered gentleman, hat in hand to a woman with a broom, and he asked her, humbly, whether she knew of anyone lately come to the parish, a gentlewoman fallen on quiet times, who might be reading, perhaps, or keeping house for someone in need of a kind voice. The old woman leaned on her broom and looked him up and down, this muddy lord asking after a poor reader, and she said, "You'll be meaning Miss Fenwick, up at the vicarage. Reads to the vicar's blind old mother and does half the good in this parish besides. Kindest soul that ever came among us. Why, everyone here knows Miss Fenwick. Everyone here knows Miss Fenwick." 2 days hard riding from the house that had hardly known she lived under its roof for years. In a strange, poor village she had been in a bare fortnight, and already everyone knew her name. His Grace told me, long after, that those 4 words undid him more thoroughly than the dead roses or the cold rooms or the stopped clock had done. For they showed him, past all argument, what she was, and what he had had beneath his own roof for years and never once seen. A warmth so plain and so true that a whole strange parish learned it in a fortnight, while he had needed to lose her to learn it at all. He stood in that little church a long moment, hat in his hands, and then he thanked the old woman by asking her name first, and using it, which she plainly was not used to from gentlemen, and he went out into the last of the light and up the lane to the vicarage. It was a low stone house with one lit window, and through that window, coming up the frozen path, he could see her. That picture he carried to the end of his days. He gave it to me so often I can set it before you as though I had stood at the glass myself. She was sitting by a small fire with a book open on her knee, reading aloud to an old blind woman in a chair opposite, and the firelight was on her plain, wide, patient face, and she was, he used this word to me, the Iron Duke, and I never once heard him take it back. She was beautiful, not as the ballroom counts beauty. As a lit hearth is beautiful to a man who has been 2 days walking in the killing cold. She read and smiled at something on the page, and the blind old woman smiled too, though she could not see it, because you did not need eyes to feel the warmth come off Nell Fenwick. You only needed to have gone a long time without it, as he had, and never known its name. And he could not knock. That was the thing he confessed with the most shame, and I think the most wonder, that the man who had never in his life hesitated at any door in the county stood frozen at a poor vicarage gate, unable to lift his hand, because he understood at last that he did not know whether he had any right to go in. He had ridden 2 days to say her name, and now at the door he saw that a name said too late is a small and shabby gift, and he was afraid it would not be enough, and he was right to be afraid. It would not have been had he brought only that. But he knocked. The vicar's manservant let him in, and there was the small commotion there always is when a great muddy gentleman appears out of the December dark at a poor door. And then Nell came into the little hall with a candle in her hand, and she saw who it was, and she went very still. I was not there, but she gave me the whole of it after, and I trust her telling above my own, for she never in her life told a thing to make herself the larger in it. She said she felt no leap of joy. That surprised me when first she said it, and it should not have. She said she felt, before anything, tired, the deep tiredness of a woman who has carried a heavy thing a long way and finally set it down and does not much want to be asked to take it up again. She thought he had come about the house. She thought there was some ledger she had left unbalanced, some quiet lever she had let go of, and that he had ridden all this way to have her set it right. That is what years of being wanted only for her use had taught her to expect, even now, even of this. And that, more than any cruelty of Creel's, is the thing that should shame us, that a heart so warm had been so schooled to expect so little. "Your Grace," she said, and dropped her small curtsy, "is something amiss at the house. If it's the October figures, I can write out plainly how they—" "No," he said, and then for a moment he could not go on. She said his voice, when it came, was not a voice she had ever heard from him. "No, it is not the house, Miss Fenwick, Nell." He said her Christian name, and she said it landed on her the way it had the once I said it, that small startled warmth, that someone had reached clean past her use and touched herself. "I have not come about the house. I have come," and here the Iron Duke of Marrowdale, who had never in his life wanted for a cold, hard word, stood in a poor stone hall with 2 days' mud on him, and could not find one. Then he found them all at once. "You wound my mother's clock on Fridays," he said, "and warmed her rooms on the first, and covered her white roses before the frost every winter, and I let them die the one winter you were gone. You kept my books true and folded 100 kindnesses into them so I'd never have to trouble myself to be kind. You fed the widow Ames out of sums I never saw. You had my chocolate sent up warm and my eggs soft the mornings I'd slept badly, and I never once wondered how the house knew I'd slept badly, because I thought it was the house. I thought it was all just the house. And it was you. It was you the whole time, Nell. Every warm thing in that cold place for years was your 2 hands, and I stepped over you 100 times a day and never learned your face. And then I sat at my own table and said, with you standing in the room, that I hardly knew why you stayed." His voice broke on it. She said that was the moment her own tiredness cracked, and something beneath it she had battened down for years began, terribly, to give. "I know now," he said. "I have ridden 2 days to tell you I know now exactly why you stayed. You stayed because you are the best thing that was ever under my roof, and I was too proud and too blind and too asleep to see it, and I let a fool laugh you out of my door and never raised my hand. And I have not had one warm morning since you went, nor has the house, nor ever will again unless you come back to it, unless you come back to me." She did not speak. She could not, she said. "But not," he said, "and this is the whole of it. This is why I have made you sit through an old man's slow telling, not to keep my books, not to wind the clock or warm the rooms or nurse the roses. I will hire 12 people for the clock and the rooms and the roses, and pay them well, and thank them by name. I have not come to fetch back my housekeeper, Nell. I have come," and the Iron Duke of Marrowdale went down in the mud and the melt off his own coat, onto one knee on the cold flags of a poor vicarage hall. "I have come to ask you to be my wife, not because you are useful to me, because you are dear to me, because I cannot be warm in this world without you, and I was fool enough to have to lose you before I could learn it. Come home and let me be the one to warm you for once in your life. Let me be the one to sit by the fire while you are read to, instead of always and forever the one who reads. Let your name be said in that house every single day by a man who will never again forget he owes you the very warmth of it." And Nell Fenwick, who had been stepped over by a great house for years and had never once wept for herself in all that time, Nell Fenwick, at "because you are dear to me," put her hand over her mouth and wept at last. Not from grief. From the strangest thing that had ever happened to her in all her quiet life, which was being seen. She did not answer him that night. I want you to know that particularly, for it is the measure of her. She was not a girl to be swept off her feet by a fine speech, even a true one, and she had a hard-won peace to weigh against it, and a real fear. She told me this plainly, that she would go home and be, within a month, a duster again, once the fright of losing her had faded out of him and the old habit of not seeing crept back. So she did not say yes. She said, "Rise up off that cold floor, your grace. You'll take your death," which set him laughing, wet-eyed, in a way I do not believe he had laughed since he was a boy before all his griefs. And she gave him a bed at the vicarage that night, a hard, narrow bed under a leaking eave, and he told me he slept the best night's sleep of his life in it. And in the morning she made him wait while she read to the blind old woman, as she had promised she would, because a promise to a poor blind woman was not, in Nell's reckoning, one whit the smaller thing beside the proposal of a duke. And I have always thought it was watching her keep that small, faithful promise before his great one, watching her put a blind pauper's mourning ahead of his own suit, without a flicker of doubt that it was right, that taught his grace, all the way down to the root of him, what manner of woman he had so nearly thrown into the dark. She said yes on the second morning. Not in the house, not by the fire in the vicarage garden, among the bare frost-killed winter beds. She told me she chose that spot on purpose, among the plain dead flowers, so that neither of them should ever after be able to mistake what passed between them for a thing that had needed silk and candlelight to be true. She said to him, "I will come back, Alaric," for by then she had his Christian name too, and I think the having of it moved him near as much as the yes, "but I will not come back as I was. If I am to be your wife, then I will be seen in that house, and my name will be known and spoken in it. And the first day it is not, the first day I am a duster to you again, I will walk out of it, and I promise you faithfully you will not find me a second time." And he said, I have this from his own mouth, "I would sooner pull the whole county down stone by stone than let you walk out of it again." And that, in truth, was their marriage vow. The one they made later in the chapel before the register was only the paperwork of it. They were married quietly at Marrowdale in the first week of the thaw. Not a grand society wedding, she would not have one, and neither, to the wonder of the whole county, would he. But the tenants came, all of them. The entire valley emptied itself up the drive to the little chapel, Croft with his mended roof, the widow Ames in her one good bonnet, the blacksmith's clever boy home from the schooling that had been quietly found and paid for him by a hand he had never known the name of till that day. and they did not come out of duty to a duke. They came out of love for a small gray woman who had held their very lives together for years without one of them, till that winter, ever learning whose hand it was that held them. She wore gray still, but a fine, soft gray, the gray of a dove's breast now and not of an unlit room. The old white roses could not be there, for the frost had killed them to the root, but the head gardener, who had never once forgiven himself the losing of them, had gone the whole length of the county in the cold and found white roses somewhere, God knows how, in the dead of that winter, and he filled the little chapel with them. And when the new duchess thanked him by his name before them all, the old man put his face in his hands and wept. I dressed his grace that morning as I had 31 years, and when I had done and stood back, he took my 2 old hands in his 2, which he had never done in all those years, not once, and he said, "You said her name to me, Beck, when no other soul would. That night when I stood there and told my own table I hardly knew why she stayed, you said her name, and you would not let it go." And I, a foolish old man, could not find a word to answer him for the tears. She is Duchess of Marrowdale now, and has been these many years, and I will tell you the change she has made, for it is the only ending worth the giving. The house is warm, not warm the way it was warm before, secretly, at her cost, a warmth carried in through a side door and never acknowledged, but warm openly, warm on purpose, warm because the man who rules it has learned at last into the bone that a house is only ever the people in it, and that the smallest and least regarded of them may well be the greatest. Her name is the most spoken name under that roof. The tenants come to her door and are heard, and go away eased as they always did, but now in the daylight and now with her honored for it. The maid who feared the dark has the room by the stair yet. The dowager's rooms are warm and bright and full the year round, for the little ones of the house play in them now, and the old white roses grow again on the south wall, a whole staff to tend them, and every one of that staff knowing exactly whose roses they are, and why they must never, ever be let to die in a frost again. And every Friday, still, though there are servants now for every task in that great house, though she need never in her life lift a finger to it again, every Friday the Duchess of Marrowdale climbs herself to the little clock on the old writing desk, and winds it with her own 2 hands. Her husband goes up with her. He stands in the doorway of the room he could not so much as enter for 3 long years, warm now, and bright, and he watches his wife wind the little clock, and I have seen his face as he stands and watches, and it is the face of a man giving quiet weekly thanks that the wisest and kindest heart in all his house did not, in the end, get clean away from him into the dark. That is the whole of it, and I have nearly told it out. I am old, and I have dressed one man his life long, and I have seen a great deal in my years, and if you should ask me what all of it has taught me, I will give you only this, and then I have done. Be careful of the quiet ones who hold your whole life up in their 2 hands and ask you for nothing. Learn their names. Say those names aloud while they can still hear you say them. For a great house may not know its own heart until the very morning that heart folds 3 gray gowns into a small trunk and walks out the door before light, so as to make no trouble, and not every man, when that morning comes to him, is granted, as my master was granted, the mercy of a second winter's road to ride out and bring his heart home.